I want to start by thanking Suzanne Garon and the Scientific Committee for putting on the agenda what for me is a really critical question, the juncture we're at, the question we need to face. I think it's a superb title. How are we going to build a global movement that is sustainable? I think these are really two big issues. One is, are we a movement? If so, where are we now? But we also have really critical challenges facing us. And I think it's about how we address them and what we want to do next. I'm coming here today with probably frustratingly a lot more questions than I have answers for. Because as I prepared the presentation, I realized I wasn't sure myself about what those answers needed to be. And as I grappled, I said, it's okay to be uncertain. It's probably appropriate that we're at that stage where it all feels messy and we could go in lots of directions. So what I would like to use today's session to do is to pose some of those questions, give you some of my thoughts about what some of those options might be, but to encourage you to give your own views when it comes to the questions and answer session, and by all means pose questions. But I'm also putting a sort of health warning. I'm looking at this very much from the perspective of a national programme which on the face of it looks to be growing very successfully. Well over half our municipalities, our local authorities, have very strong age-friendly city or county programmes. They're always headed up by the chief executive of the local authority. They always have the most senior members of the health service, the police, the private sector, the academics, the NGOs, the service providers. They always have an older person's council created from widespread consultations, their voice at the table shaping what has to be done. They're focused on achieving outcomes and collaborative planning. So why am I concerned? I'm concerned because I have a sense of urgency that the challenges that we're facing are very significant. We in Ireland can't address them on our own, and we need a global response to them. And that's what I want to concentrate on today. So the first question I'm putting to you is, do we have a movement? And what is a movement? So I go back. I'm a veteran of the women's movement. I suspect many of you here are. There was something about the 60s where the forces, the global forces, gave rise to what were extraordinary movements. We had the civil rights movement. We had the black liberation movement. We had the women's liberation movement. We had the disability movement formed by veterans returning from Vietnam who insisted on setting the charity model aside and grasping their own futures. We had the gay liberation movement. All of those have proven to be successful and transformative. We've also had other types of movement, issues-based movement, like the environmental movement, the fair trade movement. So the question is, do we have an age-friendly cities movement? And I want to ponder a little bit before answering that question, because I think there are features that actually go to make a movement and distinguish it from causes or fly-by-night temporary successes. First of all, they involve a sizable grouping of society adversely affected by discriminations, legal barriers to their full participation, attitudinal, social, economic barriers. There are early thought leaders, the outliers, who begin to challenge that norm, who begin to develop concepts of what a better world might look like. They're always resisted. They're always positioned as the extremists, quite often by the people directly affected themselves. But gradually, somehow, they evolve their own leaders, those thought leaders who capture our imaginations, who resonate with us emotionally, and begin to get us to begin to think there is a better alternative. And as they go through that early stage of wider adoption, they bring with them the institutions, the laws, the organizations that affect our lives. Till gradually the process has transformed our societies, and often to the surprise of many of us, to the betterment of all of us. What happens is they've got globally contagious diseases, they go global and are socially transformative. So the issue is, are we such a movement yet, now, into the future? I think one thing is clear, is that we don't have an older adults movement. That is not to say we don't have extraordinarily strong older adults organisations being a very strong voice. Quite often they're international. But a movement, I don't think so. Two, for me, of the essential ingredients are missing. One is we don't have an angry, discontented, older population taking to the streets, demanding a better life. In fact, when we consult, there are persistently high levels of self-reported happiness and a concern about others. And secondly, we don't even have a name for it. We don't talk about an older adults movement or older people's movement. We've had the Grey Panthers and we've had different manifestations, but a global movement, I don't think so. But I think also that's part of the reason it in some way explains what happens when the age-friendly cities guidelines just took off. And I'm going to argue that where we are at now in terms of the stages of a movement is very important for us. So movements, like any form of innovation, go through transformative stages. The early innovators, the Alex Kalachis and Louises of the world, were able to connect with 33 cities across the world, come together, produce a guidelines. But I suspect not even Alex himself was ready or prepared for the way the thing just took off. We in Ireland were just set up in 2007, and we, like many others, saw those guidelines, seized them as being the opportunity to become a focal point, a call to action that was otherwise missing. It created a framework, an integrating framework for looking at all the aspects that affects people's well-being. And it gave us a tool to take those ideas into action. So then the cities began to emerge. We began to get a global network. National programs began to emerge. And 2 years ago, we met for the first time. We came face to face with these people in this movement. And we began to think, this is okay. We're good. We're good for a future. We began to build the relationships. And we're now back here 2 years later. But I think we're at a tipping point, and we could go either way. The challenges ahead of us, I think, could derail us. But in some ways, it's up to us ourselves to take responsibility for ensuring that a tipping point takes us from where I think we are now in the early majority phase, in the early adopters phase, into the early majority phase, and so that we can manage it through to success. So what are those challenges I keep referring to? I see 6 of them that are really critically strategic. We need critical mass. John's map yesterday showed that while there has been very rapid growth in the movement, over 145 cities, 9 national programs, there are huge areas of the map unpopulated. And yet, in Dublin, we brought 6 of the African countries together, ready to form a Pan-African regional movement. And we need, in some ways, to be asking why that hasn't happened. In Cameroon earlier this year, there was a very successful conference of West African and mainly Francophone countries that showed the potential for what's needed. So I think we ourselves, as those cities and national programs, have a role to play. The WHO can reach out to governments, provide legitimacy, provide encouragement. But we, the cities and national programs, have a contribution to make in terms of sharing our resources, sharing our learning, and twinning with them. We certainly need to be able to strengthen the evidence base about what we're doing. I am asked 2 very uncomfortable questions, and I don't have the answer to them. And I am being asked them more and more regularly. What does an age-friendly city or town or local authority look like? Will I know it when I've entered it? And secondly, what's been the impact on the quality of life for older adults? Now, I don't think we have much time left before we're going to have to be able to provide the answers to those important questions. And we can't do that on our own. We've started to in Ireland. We've developed what we call an outcomes-based approach, which we think reflects the language of the people we've been listening to. We're building indicators around it, and we're beginning to start collecting the evidence. But actually, we need to be able to collect the evidence from across the world, pool it, learn from it, and bring it to those who would challenge our future. We need ourselves to get better and quicker at learning from what works in other countries. We need to be setting up communities of practice that address our most complex, intractable issues, whether it's transport, whether it's multi-stakeholder engagement. We need to have those communities of practice. We need an e-zine that keeps us completely up to date. And we need to be sharing our resources. We don't have the time to keep reinventing the wheel in our own areas. The next thing we need to do, and the one we focused on usefully yesterday, is this issue of multi-stakeholder engagement. We've done it at one level. They are all around the table at each of our municipalities and at national level, led by the Prime Minister's office. But I am also clear that you do not sustain multi-stakeholder engagement unless you bring them to the table to solve questions that are relevant to themselves. So no one of those outcomes that we look at can be solved by any one part of the silo. So we're clear that you bring people together to look at how to enable people to feel and be safer in their own communities. That is a lot of stakeholders. Healthier and longer lives. That's a lot of stakeholders, and I'm happy to talk about some of the ways in which we've addressed that. So the next one then is we need to become relevant. There are a lot of competing agendas out there, and it's not just smart cities, healthy cities, green cities. It's those who are looking at the resources that we have been able to command and the time and concentration we're able to command, who want it for themselves. And we need to be relevant to the business community. We need to build alliances with the Global Coalition on Aging, with the international organizations like Alzheimer's, with the OECD and organizations like that, because we need to show our relevance to issues like public sector reform, devolving and strengthening local government, strengthening the role of the citizen at the table in terms of shaping their communities. And lastly, I think we need to build strong governance and infrastructure that will take us forward. So I think we're at a stage where we need now to change our identity and become we, the cities and national programs, taking responsibility for addressing those challenges and coming up with the solutions that will work. Being able to exploit to its fullest the legitimacy and profile and reach and expertise that the WHO bring us, but equally maturely accepting the fact that there are resource and political constraints on the WHO. And therefore we need to think about the sort of infrastructure we need as the cities, as the national programs, to bring us together to build the responses, whether it's communities of practice. We need to be meeting more frequently, but we've got to a stage where we need to go beyond conferences now into a sustainable infrastructure that will serve us. And I think what that structure looks like is part of what I want to be able to explore with you today. We definitely need some form of international steering group that brings the national programs and all of this. Well, we need a forum in which all of the cities, all of the national programs can have a voice in shaping how we make sure this evolves into a movement. But we also need to be realistic. There needs to be a smaller executive group that can make decisions, respond faster. We need to create a network of networks with all of those for whom we have common cause. Now, none of that is easy. I'm not saying I have the solution in my head as to what that would look like. The truth is I don't. But I would love us today to have a conversation that talks about what that might look like. And then, because I think we have it in our power to ensure that what is now at a tipping point becomes a sustainable, vibrant, global movement that enhances quality of life for all of us. Thank you.